What's up guys, I'm Havoc, and today I'm going to tell you objectively what are the best and worst SMGs to use stopping power on in Call of Duty Warzone. If you haven't already, check out part 1 of this series where I talk about the assault rifles and go a bit more in depth into my testing methods. If you like the video, be sure to drop a like. If you don't, a dislike. Either way, let me know in the comments your thoughts, and consider subscribing if you like this type of content, as I'm currently working on doing the other gun classes in the game as well. Alright, let's get right into it. Now, before we get into all the numbers, I'd like to briefly talk about my methods I use to gather this data. If you've seen my previous video talking about the best guns to use stopping power on that are ARs, and feel free to skip over this part, as it's pretty much the same thing. The only thing that I added was I wanted to talk about the percentage decrease in time to kill. So I thought that was an important factor that I didn't really touch on in the previous video. The formula I used for that was the 1 minus the base TTK over the stopping power TTK times 100 to make it a percent. For the base damage and RPM, I gathered those from truegamedata.com. The health damage and armor damage, I gathered by the same method, but with just slightly different pixel counts. By taking the difference in where the bar is at, so where the bar was full, and then dividing that by the value of the bar, so this would be by 50, you can get the health damage. So say this one was probably like 70 something pixels. 70 divided by 50 would give me the armor damage. And then health damage, same thing, would whatever pixel count this was, around 100 divided by 263 times the value of the bar being 100, then I would get the health damage. The combined damage is just the sum of the two. The DPS multiplier is the combined damage or the stopping power damage divided by the base damage. The time to kill decrease, or decrease is a good thing, is the new stopping power time to kill minus the base time to kill. And then all of my recoil measurements are done with the pixel counts of these lines. In this video, they got really grainy for some reason. I'm not quite sure why. But the N is the normal rounds, the S is the stopping power rounds. This is measured in the pixel counts by doing the best fit line of all of the points on these recoils. Each of these recoils are 5 sprays of the same gun. And then to get the percentage of the base recoil, it's the stopping power recoil divided by the base recoil times 100 to get it as a percent. In effort to save a bit of time on this video, rather than putting all of these values on their own individual slides, I lumped them together into just one table so you can look at all the SMG damage values at the same time. In addition, I did that because the SMGs all have really similar multipliers, and I think that's due to them all having really similar damage profiles, what I call. So you can see all of these 4 up here are 55, 34, 34, and 30 for their head, chest, stomach, and limb damage. The MP5 just differs in that it has a slightly lower head damage. It got nerfed way back before Warzone came out. And then for these 4 guns, it's sort of the same story. 40, 25, 25, and 22 for the head, chest, stomach, and limb. And then the ISO is slightly lower, just having 36 headshot damage. And if you can look at the health and armor damage here, but the combined damage, they all have the same multiplier and end up getting the 89, 52, 52, 43 for these top 5 guns. And for the bottom 4 guns, they have the same multipliers and getting 69, 34, 34, and 40. The outliers are the ISO, where it has just a lower headshot damage because it has a lower base headshot damage. Weirdly, the inverse is true for the MP5, where it has a higher headshot damage combined, but has a lower base damage. So you'll see later that it has a higher multiplier. And most of that in this case comes from the health damage, where that's a big boost, 46 over 35, so you get 9 extra damage. And you're losing 4 damage here, so you're getting net 5 more damage. One other thing I want to mention is that I forgot to talk about this in the previous video. The way that you determine how many stopping power rounds are in a gun is dependent on the base magazine size of the gun. So you get one of 2 things. You either get 30 bullets, or you get the base magazine size of the gun if the base magazine is less than 30. So in the case of the AUG, the base magazine is 25, you're going to get 25. With the Bison, I think it's 64, you're only going to get 30 rounds. For the recoils of the SMGs, I also wanted to look at the hipfire recoils, as many people do hipfire builds for their SMGs. So I wanted to see if the stopping power played a role into any of that. So you can see for the AUG, it might play a role, but I think it's probably little to none, and this can just be chalked up to slight differences in how the bullets decided to spread between the normal bullets, which are on the right, compared to the stopping power bullets, which are on the left. I didn't quantify these, I just sort of took these visual measurements, so feel free to make your own conclusions. The length of the recoil, 209 pixels for the base, 277 pixels for the stopping power, giving the stopping power 132% base recoil. The Bison and any other gun that had more than a 30 bullet base magazine, what I did was I wrote a script that would take the RPM of the gun and then do some math, get it to where it would hold down my left mouse button only until it shot 30 bullets. So all these measurements for recoils, if the base magazine is over 30, they're all taken with 30, because that way it would be only comparing it to the stopping power rounds and not be interfered with the rest of the magazine, watering down the effects of the stopping power. For hipfire, normal rounds and stopping power rounds pretty much look the same. The normal rounds for ADS, you have a 318 pixel magnitude, and for the stopping power, you have a 352 pixel magnitude. I like to make a note of what happens at the top here. They both reach about the same height, but then once the Bison reaches this height, it goes completely flat and just goes right horizontally. So it will travel up this path quicker, and then once it hits this sort of cap, it just stays along that ceiling going right. I included that in because that's going to make the recoil feel like more, because it's moving up the path quicker. You're going to get 111% of your base recoil. The Fennec hipfire, I noticed when I was shooting it that it seems to pull a little bit up and to the right. You can see here, but it's very slight. Could be just the way it was measured, but both of these start from the same height. But this one, I mean, you can see in the path, sort of how it's grouped, it does seem a little bit more diagonal. For the ADS recoils, you have 222 pixels as the base, and then 338 pixels as the stopping power, giving you 152 base recoil with stopping power. The ISO hipfire spreads look just about the same. You have a ADS normal recoil of 151 pixels and a stopping power recoil of 282, giving you 187% of your base recoil. The MP5, the normal hipfire, and the stopping power hipfire. The stopping power hipfire looks a little bit elongated, but I think it's a little too close to call. I'd have to repeat this a lot more times to get a real measurement, but I'll let y'all make your own judgments about this one. For the ADS recoil, you have 187 pixels for your base, and then 317 pixels for your stopping power, giving you 167% base recoil. The MP7, the hipfire normal and the hipfire stopping power, I think for this one, it's very clear that the stopping power has an effect on the hipfire recoil. It's definitely a lot more elongated than the MP5, but it has a lot less a recoil difference in the ADS. So 205 pixels as your base compared to 294 pixels for stopping power gives you 134% of your base recoil. And then for the P90, the hipfire is about the same for both of them, normal rounds and stopping power rounds. And this is correct. I checked this multiple times. The normal recoil when you're ADS is 275 pixels, and then the stopping power recoil is actually less at 222 pixels. So you're getting 81% of your base recoil. So you have a reduction in recoil on the P90 when you have stopping power rounds in. Seems like a bug, probably not intended. Who knows? For the Striker, the hipfires are both about the same with normal and stopping power rounds. Your normal ADS recoil is 200 pixels, and then your stopping power recoil is 282 pixels, giving you 141% of your base. Before I show you the Uzi, I want to show you this quick video clip of the Uzi. This isn't normally where I do my testing. This is a much farther back, but it gives a more clear view of what I'm trying to show. So we're just going to do a quick recoil test on this wall. This is without stopping power. And I did shoot all 32 bullets in this one instead of just 30, but that's not too bad. Let me load stopping power. Just strafed. We're doing the same height. And I think you could see what's going on here. So as you saw in that video, and as you can see here now quantified, the Uzi recoil with stopping power is just a laser beam. It's insane. You're going from the ADS of 121 pixels to 41 pixels. You're only having a third or 33% of your base recoil. It's just absurd. And then for the hip fires, they both look about the same, so really no difference in hip fire. Now moving on to the summaries of it. These are the DPS and recoil values for all of the SMGs. This is sorted by the average multiplier, and the recoil is sorted by the recoil from the best to the worst. So the MP5, you have the best average DPS, and that's pretty much just because of the headshot. Otherwise, it would fall just in line with all these 1.53s. And all these values are all really close. 0.53 to 0.57 to 0.6. I mean, you're all within very few damage. So the DPS part isn't that crazy of a difference. But they do, as I mentioned at the start of the video, they follow the damage profiles, all have the same multiplier. So the AUG, Bison, Striker, Uzi, and MP5 all fit that first damage profile, while the Fennec, MP7, P90, and ISO fit that other damage profile. And they have the same multipliers applied to them. These are the time to kills of all of the SMGs. These are both sorted. This one is sorted by the percent faster time to kill. For instance, with the MP5, with stopping power, and you're killing 39.59% faster than you would without stopping power. The reason why I wanted to do this is it gives a better comparison of like the gun to itself, I think, than maybe looking at the time to kill decreases in milliseconds. The Bison, AUG, Uzi, Striker, all very similar. The 37s, Fennec, MP7, P90s, all the 31, and then ISO, because of its really bad headshot multiplier, is only at 27. This is the same chart, but this time it's sorted by the millisecond decrease. And so you can see what I was talking about, how just because it has the best percent multiplier, it doesn't apply to here, because this is a percent of the base. So if it has a really fast base TTK, like the MP5 does, then it's not going to get as much of a actual millisecond decrease, because, I mean, you very obvious to see between the Uzi and the Bison, but Uzi has a slightly longer average time to kill without stopping power than the Bison. So by taking the same percentage off, you're going to get a bit more of a decrease in your time to kill. But they sort of follow the percentages. Obviously, higher percent off is going to take more of this value off. But I thought this was another good data point to look at. This one is taking into account the recoil with the DPS. So this is the DPS. So the good and the bad. Well, in most cases, the bad. Taking a ratio of both to get sort of a ranking of how much is the DPS worth it compared to the recoil. Whereas with the ISO, it's definitely not worth it just because of that huge recoil increase, almost doubling the magnitude. But even with one of the lower DPS multipliers, the Uzi, getting a huge benefit, mostly because of the recoil. So you're getting a free damage boost and a huge recoil boost, or well, decrease. It's very weird. It's just incredible. And then the same thing with the P90, just like the Uzi, but to a lesser degree, with a slightly higher damage boost. And you can see the rest of the numbers here if you want to pause it. This is the TTKs done in the same way, where it takes this value of the average, divides it by the base to get the best ratios. The Uzi and the P90 again are on top in this one, just because the recoil values are probably broken. And then the rest of them sort of follow that same trend of the recoil values mostly being the kings. A few differences in the case here where just this percentage kill faster outweighs that. And especially if you're only doing hipfire builds, the numbers that really matter are these ones, because recoil isn't a factor in the hipfire builds. It's pretty much not a factor. I couldn't find any real difference in the hipfire recoil when comparing it between the normal and the stopping power rounds. So this is the percentage graph. You can take a look at it if you want. And this is the milliseconds decrease compared to the recoil as well, taking this value and dividing it by this value. And this one's again led by the ones with more recoil. And I think this is in the same order. Yeah, just swapping the AUG and the striker for the slightly more recoil here. But the striker gets a much better millisecond time to kill decrease. That's all. Thanks for watching.